Japan. The land of the rising sun has for many years been the second largest music market in the world. In other words, they're the second largest purchasers of music in the world. Back before social media and before K-pop became one of the leading music genres today, the nascent genre needed to expand out of Korea if it wanted to grow. So they turned to Japan's music market, but it took some trial and error to be successful. 8 years ago, when I was at Korea University for my master's degree, I decided to devote my thesis to this topic, particularly the successes and failures of K-pop's attempt in Korea, Japan, and the United States. A lot has changed since then, and so for this new video series named after my thesis title, K-pop Going Global, we're going to take a look at my analyses, review the history of K-pop's attempt at globalization, and reevaluate my thesis to see how much my findings can be applied to today. As some of you might know from my most important moments in K-pop history video, K-pop began in the 90s where it blended Western music styles with Korean productions. A new formulation that tailored to the Korean audience and transformed the music industry within the country. Over time, it has evolved, but one thing that's always been central to the genre is how labels train their idols in singing, dancing, and acting. Early on, the industry birthed multiple entertainment companies and competing acts, and by the turn of the century, the K-pop, Hallyu, or Korean wave began, setting the stage to go beyond South Korea. One reason for this is that the music market in South Korea has always been limited because of its small population, which was about 44 million back in the 1990s. Compounded by the fact that there was increasing music piracy within the country, South Korea as a whole was just not profitable for K-pop. Conversely, in terms of music markets, the United States has always been typically number one, while Japan was number two in the world. To put it in perspective, in the year 2000, South Korea's music industry accounted for $30 million US, while the US generated $14 billion and Japan made $6.4 billion. Numbers matter, so the K-pop industry had to export its product, and it looked to Japan since it was a regional springboard to the world. It was also more closely aligned with sociological and cultural norms that South Korea could capitalize on. One of the first K-pop acts to debut in Japan was SM Entertainment's girl group S.E.S, where they made their official Japanese debut in 1998. Their timing was perfect because Korea and Japan had finally lifted their World War II era barriers between them. Some of the Japanese audience already knew about the group from their Korean songs, and their Japanese covers on television helped them gain some recognition within the Japanese market. S.E.S member Shu was the only member fluent in Japanese, and so she spoke for the group in their promotions there. However, the group's success in Japan paled in comparison to the success in Korea, and their Japanese debut album Reach Out peaked at number 37, selling approximately 14,000 copies. But this was only the beginning for Korean audiences. SM Entertainment had gained some experience from the S.E.S project and decided to try again, but this time the company pulled out all stops. And by 2000, the company had already initiated the BoA project. BoA was the first female singer who achieved true success in Japan, and SM CEO Lee Soo-man claimed that SM reportedly spent about $3 million US in training BoA for 3 years in intense dance, vocal, and Japanese language training. She made her Korean debut in August of 2000 at the age of 13, but this was only the first step. SM saw potential in the Japanese market and prepared for her debut there in 2001. BoA was repackaged with a culturally ambiguous image and was trained to speak, sing, and present herself as a Japanese star. With the S.E.S, it was well known that the girls were Korean, whereas with BoA, this would not be immediately obvious. BoA went on to become the first Korean and foreign artist to reach number one on the Japanese Oricon charts, and her first 6 albums claimed the top spot. Her success in Japan made her a national star in Korea, and she then finally achieved the success and recognition in her home country shortly after. Her training and subsequent success became the standard for how K-pop acts would handle debuts in Japan in that period. With BoA's success, SM finally found a formula that worked, and so they utilized the same localization strategy with TVXQ in 2004. Similar to BoA's success, TVXQ, known as Toho Shinki in Japan, took some time to find their stride, and they eventually hit it big in Japan in 2007 with their hit Purple Line, which reached #1 on the Oricon chart, making them the first foreign male group to do so. The group has since solidified their status as true J-pop stars in Japan with many accolades, hits, and millions of copies of their albums and singles sold within the country. However, it should be noted that with their debut in Japan, the Japanese audience could tell that they were Korean because of their accents. But after much persistence, the boys had immersed themselves in the culture and were well spoken, so they too could become as much as part of the country's music history and status as BoA had. I would argue, aside from the language barrier and superficial image attributes, Japanese consumers required something from Korean acts that they were not being provided. As I mentioned previously, in 2014, I was working on my master's thesis and diving into the Japanese consumer mindsets to understand how the Japanese perceive K-pop acts there. At the time, there had been a recent boom of K-pop debuts in the country, so I went there to conduct my own research through surveys and in-depth interviews. In my interviews in Japan, I showed Japanese versions of popular K-pop songs to interviewees that included some Japanese K-pop fans. I showed them more than a dozen acts and popular songs from this period to gather their thoughts on the music, as well as understand what they look for when it comes to music. Although my research took place close to 15 years after K-pop's first forays into Japan, I believe that the expectations of Japanese consumers had not changed, as they grew up and witnessed their own music industry shifts in the 2000s. In my interviews, the Japanese people I spoke with expressed that they listen to music for a particular sound, as well as for soul, healing, and a particular message. All of them said that if K-pop artists record songs in Japanese, being fluent in the nuances of the language is highly important. They looked for meaning behind the lyrics, and when a singer is singing it in a language that they are fluent with, the feeling is much more relatable to them. The Japanese K-pop fans mentioned that they preferred to listen to the Korean versions over Japanese versions of K-pop songs because they felt that the Japanese ones lacked a message, felt awkward to listen to, and or that they had a difficulty understanding them because of translation issues. Interestingly, at the end of all the interviews, all the Japanese people felt that every K-pop artist started to look and sound the same, as it seemed that they were just listening to just sound versus music and artistic content. In addition, the Japanese claim that Koreans tend to focus too much on visuals and performance instead of qualities within the song itself. I believe that in many cases, this is the reason why some of the K-pop artists couldn't break through the barrier in Japan and why BoA was so successful. When it came to BoA, all the Japanese interviewees could easily understand her and feel her emotion and tone, mostly because she was fluent in Japanese and her own lyrics were more relatable and could understand her situation. They admitted that they never knew BoA was Korean until a few years after she was already established. In contrast, with TVXQ, all of the Japanese knew they were Korean from the start since their lack of language fluency in the beginning from their debut was much more apparent. But not all the stars were trained through record labels though, as Younha proved in the mid-2000s. After auditioning with about 20 Korean music companies, she was rejected by all of them for not being pretty enough. Undeterred, she decided to pursue her passion in Japan. She dropped out of high school at the age of 16, enrolled at Korea's Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, and majored in Japanese. But prior to that, she had already begun learning Japanese because growing up, she had taught herself the language by watching Japanese dramas, and this early education helped her. She arrived to Japan in early 2004 and released her debut single Yubikiri shortly after. Younha later found major success with her second single Hokiboshi, which then became one of the theme songs for the very popular anime Bleach. It climbed the charts and helped her make it the second artist after BoA to break into Oricon's top 20, where Younha's nickname became the Oricon Comet. With multiple Korean acts finding success in Japan, others in the K-pop industry sought to capitalize on the lucrative Japanese market. JYP Entertainment's Rain, who was part of the early second generation of K-pop idols, already had notable recognition and success in Asia for his music, on top of starring in popular K-dramas such as Full House in 2004. In 2006, JYP entered Japan with Rain, and his debut Japanese album Eternal Rain ended up peaking at number 14. He was never fluent in Japanese and was most often seen using limited Japanese in interviews before switching to Korean with Japanese subtitles. In addition, JYP's music style at the time was closer to American taste, and since the K-pop boom in Japan was still several years away, Rain's success there ultimately never met the expectations set by JYP Entertainment. Rain's contracts were terminated, and JYP Entertainment put its efforts into Japan on the back burner. A couple years later, the popular K-pop boy group under DSP Entertainment called S.E.S had notable success within the country. Multiple members were fluent in Japanese, and they even snagged Best New Artist at the Japanese Golden Disc Awards in 2009, making them the first South Korean acts to achieve this. They were also helped by the growing popularity of K-dramas in Asia during this era, since member Hyunjung starred in the massively successful Boys Over Flowers drama in 2009. Toward the latter part of the 2000s, social media and the introduction of YouTube began to play a major role in helping the K-pop genre reach the Western audiences. Viral videos featuring K-pop music videos, performances, and related content allowed the industry to capitalize on its growing global popularity. K-pop was on the rise throughout Asia, and it became a viable music alternative to consumers in the region. The very popular Korean act BIGBANG made their Japanese debut in 2008, and the group's respectable success is partly due to the fact that nearly half the members had Japanese language fluency. In my interviews, one avid listener claimed to be a fan of BIGBANG, but preferred to only listen to their Korean material since the meaning of their music was better conveyed in their native tongue. This shows the correlation between early success in Japan with those artists who were fluent versus those who were not. But it would later prove unnecessary once K-pop got a solid foothold in Japan. By the 2010s, the K-pop landscape had begun to make a name for itself, where it found Japanese fans of the expanding music genre. And not long after that, other K-pop acts began to ride the Hallyu wave and seek success in the Japanese music market. Kara rode the success of their very popular Korean track Mr. and debuted in Japan with a Japanese version of the hit song. With Kara, the ladies were all fluent in Japanese, had an image and sound that blended well with the already existing J-pop taste, and they ultimately resonated very well with the audience in the country. Kara eventually went on to achieve massive sales and chart-topping hits. During Kara's foray into Japan, SM Entertainment also debuted Girls' Generation, another second-gen girl group who had great popularity in the K-pop realm with an image and sound that also closely aligned with Japanese tastes. In the beginning, the girls relied on member Soo-young in interviews, who is the only fluent member in Japanese in the group. Girls' Generation overall have done quite well on the market, having set their own records with millions of albums sold there. Kara and Girls' Generation, as well as many other K-pop acts, rebranded and packaged their girl groups to fit Japanese taste with a more innocent look and change to their makeup. In my research, all of the Japanese interviewees knew Kara was more skilled in Japanese and reminisced on the impact Mr. had in Japan. They recalled that the hip dance, their personality, and look were all that made them special and incredibly popular several years before then. In the 2010s, K-pop was becoming very popular in the Asia region, where many Japanese people became fans of the genre. Most often, the artists might use a lot of originally composed Korean songs and then release them into the Japanese language. They were riding the Hallyu wave, and the labels no longer needed to use the localization strategy that BoA and TVXQ implemented years previously. Also, because with the growth of the internet, it was difficult for a Korean act to present itself as culturally ambiguous because audiences pretty much knew the origin of artists thanks to having more information at their fingertips. Many of these groups in the 2010s interviewed with interpreters and only had limited knowledge of the language. The Korean wave into Japan was noticeable, and a lot of the audience picked up on the accents within the music, and some parts, typically rap sections, were still done in Korean. This resulted in some backlash from the audience, and with rising political tensions at points, it forced companies to pivot their marketing in Japan. But generally during this period, the efforts used by the labels seemed lazy and were seen as an obvious push to make a quick buck in the country. Interestingly, the Wonder Girls were one of the last major groups in this era of K-pop to debut in Japan in 2012. And in my 2014 interviews, I showed them the Japanese version of the Wonder Girls' Nobody, and some of them recognized it. I chose that song simply because it was one of the few K-pop songs that had Korean, Japanese, and English versions meant for all three markets. You'll find out more on their story and what JYP Entertainment did after Rain in the next video in this series, but when it came to Nobody, the interviewees enjoyed the simplicity of it, but felt it was too easy and a little childish again, which continued to solidify their claim that K-pop songs generally lacked a meaningful message. In addition to my in-depth interviews and focus groups, I also conducted wide-ranging surveys that captured a wider Japanese audience who were fans of K-pop for a more quantitative analysis. One question I asked was why they listened to their favorite artists in K-pop. The number one answer was music. While the concepts that most appealed to them in both male and female were the cute and innocent concepts, which also explained why many K-pop acts shied away from the more suggestive and sexual tones of their music in Korea to more innocent images in the Japanese market. When I asked the fans to describe K-pop in one word, the top answers were energy source, uplifting, colorful, collective referring to the group synchronization, new, awesome, and spiritual. Life was the most popular answer, and life being defined as an energy source that brings life to the Japanese people. You'll learn more on how this contrasted to how the Americans viewed K-pop in the next video in this series. When I wrapped up my thesis in 2014, I concluded that based on the success stories of BoA and TVXQ, it pays to be fluent in Japanese. The rewards and success far outweigh the artists who simply translate a popular Korean song and simply memorize Japanese lyrics, and lack an understanding of the nuances of the language. Furthermore, full fluency in the language can convey emotion and soul through the song and will ultimately further establish a stronger connection with the Japanese people. In addition, fluency can lead to Japanese drama roles and more traditional media appearances that have shown to help boost popularity for artists like TVXQ, Kara, and even members of Supernova, which in turn created a more well-rounded marketing approach in establishing artist awareness and loyalty. Yes, Japan is still a strong market, and if the campaign is successful, Japan can be much more lucrative than South Korea. Twice, Stray Kids, ITZY, Red Velvet, 17, and BTS are among the biggest K-pop groups in the country these days. All of them have some level of fluency in the language among the different members. In my thesis research, I was able to prove how having a group member from another country, typically within Asia, helped create a sense of nationalistic pride. Thai K-pop members like Nickhoon of 2PM, Lisa of Blackpink, Soren of CLC, Bam Bam of GOT7, and 10 of NCT and Wavy, to name a few, all helped their respective groups become widely successful in Thailand. This goes for all K-pop groups who feature members of other countries, and K-pop has since tapped into Japan to feature Japanese members that also reap the benefits of national pride. 8 years after my thesis, debuting K-pop acts in Japan is still done, but it's no longer the norm, nor is it necessary for an act's overall success. They now have the world much more in their grasp, and smaller companies might not have the resources to debut acts in Japan since it's still a very expensive country to promote in. Despite that, the world is now their oyster, and having analytics and knowing where the fans are with each artist's popularity, the groups can now follow their fan base. Looking back though, Japan helped serve as a blueprint for K-pop acts to find their niche and work to promote in the country that best aligns with their sound and image. But times have drastically changed in terms of social media and worldwide interest in K-pop. Japan definitely helped K-pop gain the monetary resources and knowledge to reinvest their efforts today. With how K-pop attempted the Japanese market in the 21st century, you can see the growth and the transition in marketing efforts and approaches. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at the history of K-pop debuts in the United States and see how the efforts from Japan's experience did not play into the American attempts. We'll also take a look at my research then and compare it to now. Stay tuned for that next, but as mentioned, it all started with Japan. We have to give it to acts like BoA and TVXQ who helped pave the way for Korea and K-pop to see the value in taking their music industry abroad and finding success. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for the next part in this series. I really hope you all do me a huge favor of hitting those like and subscribe buttons for me to see more quality K-pop content. I appreciate you for stopping by. Check out many more of my videos while you're here, and I shall see you next time.